All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into something pretty interesting.
Right.
It's about President Trump's idea about using import tariffs, to try to like bring back American manufacturing.
Right.
And we've got this analysis piece from Jonathan Chait over at The Atlantic, and
Hmm.
I thought it'd be really interesting to like unpack this and kind of
Yeah.
see, could this plan have actually worked?
Right.
What were some of the things that kind of stood in the way? And I'll
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think the core of Chait's argument really comes down to this idea that, like,
Okay.
for these tariffs to actually encourage companies to invest in like new factories in America,
Right.
they really needed to believe that these things are going to be around for a while.
Yeah, that like it couldn't just be a temporary thing, right?
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
that perception of like long-term stability,
Mm-hmm.
that's absolutely key.
So like why is that so important?
Well, because when you think about it, like investing in manufacturing, building new plants or even just like retooling existing ones, that is a huge financial commitment.
Oh yeah, for sure.
These companies, they're not going to just like jump into that
Right.
if they think that like the thing that's giving them a competitive edge today
Right.
might just disappear tomorrow.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
They need
Yeah.
some level of certainty.
Well, and Chait points out that, the messaging that was coming out about these tariffs was anything but certain.
Right,
He's
yeah.
talking about how like the White House was saying that these were going to be permanent.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally. So like on the one hand, you have this like official line
Mm-hmm.
that these tariffs represent like a fundamental shift
Right.
in trade policy,
Yeah.
and that messaging, like in theory,
Mm.
should have encouraged businesses to like, start thinking about
Yeah.
domestic production in the long term.
Yeah, for sure.
But then at the same time, you
Yeah.
have these other voices kind of like contradicting that.
Yeah, he brings up this tweet from Eric Trump,
Yeah.
right, about like the benefits of being an early negotiator or something like that.
Yeah. What was that all about?
Yeah, like what was he even implying there?
Well, I mean, if you have someone who's that close to the administration,
Right,
basically saying that like, oh yeah, we can make deals
right.
to like get out from under these tariffs,
Yeah,
it immediately like throws that whole idea of permanence out the window,
yeah, totally.
Like all of a sudden there's this possibility of change,
Mhm.
and that completely undermines that sense of stability
Yeah,
that these businesses need
yeah.
when they're thinking about, making these big investments.
And it wasn't just like a tweet,
It's
right?
Not at all.
Like Shea actually quotes President Trump himself
Right.
talking about how these tariffs give the U.S. leverage in negotiations.
Totally.
Like, how does that fit into all this?
Well, it's like it changes the whole purpose of the tariffs, right? Like instead of them being seen as this like, long-term protection
Right.
for American manufacturing,
Mm-hmm.
they suddenly start to look like just like a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
And that shift in perception would obviously make businesses wonder.
Yeah.
Like, okay, are these things actually meant to last?
Right.
Or is this all just a tactic?
Right.
Yeah.
So then you have all this like back and forth. You've got the White House saying one thing, and then
Uh-huh.
you've got these other people kind of hinting at something different.
Totally.
So then Trump tries to like calm everybody down, right?
Mhm.
He puts out this post on Truth Social saying that his policies would never change.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Like specifically trying to reassure investors and stuff.
Right. But Chait's not buying it at all, is he?
No, he's not buying it. So basically what he's saying is
Right.
like once you brought up the idea of negotiation,
Yeah.
once you've even hinted that these tariffs might not be permanent,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to come back from that.
Right.
Like you can say, oh yeah, they're definitely going to stay in place.
Right.
But people are going to have that seed of doubt.
So that initial doubt is kind of like already there?
Exactly.
Right.
And to really drive that point home,
Okay.
Chait brings up the example of that Vietnam negotiation.
Okay. Right.
He claims that happened like right after the Never Change post.
Oh, wow.
So it's like this perfect illustration of
Right.
how the actions don't really match the words.
Yeah.
If the administration is already talking about potential trade agreements that
Totally.
could totally change these tariff arrangements,
Yeah.
it just reinforces this idea that
Yeah.
the policies are not set in stone.
Right. Regardless of what anybody's saying.
Exactly.
So, like, what's Chait's overall takeaway from all this?
Well, he's pretty critical of the whole thing.
Okay.
He argues that even if the communication had been perfect,
Mm-hmm.
like even if everybody was on the same page,
Right.
the plan itself might have been flawed.
Okay.
But he says that these mixed messages, they really botched it.
Okay.
And that created a ton of uncertainty in American trade.
So basically he's saying that if you're going to use tariffs to
Yeah.
try to like boost domestic manufacturing,
Right.
you got to be really clear and consistent about your commitment to them.
Yeah, you can't have all this like waffling back and forth,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
because that just undermines the whole thing.
Yeah. So I think like the big takeaway from all of this is
Yeah.
like if governments are going to try to influence these like big business decisions,
Right.
like whether companies are going to invest in manufacturing here
Mm-hmm.
by using these long-term economic policies,
Yeah.
they got to be really, really clear about what they're doing and why they're doing it.
100%.
And they can't just like change their mind all the time.
Right.
Because according to Chait's analysis,
Yeah,
that lack of clarity really messed things up.
absolutely. And that leads to this like really interesting question.
That I think we should all be thinking about.
Okay, what's that?
Like, beyond this specific example with the tariffs,
Mm-hmm.
what are the things that governments need to do
Okay.
to really gain the trust
Mm-hmm.
of investors and businesses
Yeah.
when they're rolling out these long-term economic plans?
Like, what are the strategies they need?
Exactly, because it seems like
Yeah.
just enacting a policy isn't enough.
Right.
You know, you have to be able to effectively communicate
Yeah.
what it's supposed to do,
Yeah.
why it's supposed to do that,
Yeah.
and how long it's going to be around for.
That's a really good point. I think that's something that we can all kind of think about
Okay.
going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hey, thanks for joining me on this deep dive today.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.